Hi there, I'm Tom, and this is Tom's Grinder Lab. A warm welcome. This is a series on how to make great espresso. This is part 1 out of 5, and today we're looking at the 3 most common espresso mistakes. So when people are on forums and they say, help, I've got a problem with my espresso, it doesn't taste very nice, and if I jump in or others jump in and do a diagnosis, we generally find that 80% of the causes are covered by these 3 very common mistakes. So let's have a look at them, and we'll unpack each one as we go. First of all is missing the peak flavor window. Number 2 is unintentional taste tainting. And number 3 is ignorance of the drop. Let's unpack these 3 most common mistakes. So number 1 is missing the peak flavor window. When you buy coffee, and if you're roasting at home, this is different, but most people are going to be buying their coffee from, I don't know, the supermarket or from a roaster, hopefully. And if you ever see this on a bag, best before, and then there's a date stamp, almost invariably, the beans have been roasted 12 months prior to that date. So in this case, expiry is essentially best before is 12th of March 25. The beans were roasted on the 12th of March 24, 1 year prior. So this is typical of supermarket beans. If you see this, you should probably avoid the beans, or at the very least, assume that the roast date, which is going to be very important in a moment, is 12 months prior to this date. That's a reasonably safe bet. Ideally, a careful roaster, someone who cares about freshness, will actually have the date that the beans were roasted on the bag. And that's really relevant for what I'm about to show you. And by the way, if you have a bag of beans that has neither best before nor the actual roast date, then definitely don't buy those beans, because you have no idea if they're too fresh or they're too stale. What I'm talking about here comes down to this bell curve, and every bean when it's roasted, you can actually pour the espresso too soon or you can pour it too late. And in the middle here, this part of the bell curve represents what I call peak flavor. So if you pour your espresso, say 1 day after it's roasted, or 2 days or 3 days or 4 days after it's roasted, relative to the peak flavor window, you're going to find that the flavor is weaker, that the body of the espresso is thinner, and what you're going to get is a fizzier crema. It'll be like a really thick crema, but it won't be as dense, if you like. And if you leave the beans too long after roasting, so they end up being stale, what you're going to find is the espresso will also be weaker, and the body will also be thinner, and there'll be very, very little crema. But if you get, I'm going to tell you the peak flavor windows in a moment, but if you get it right, not too soon, not too late, you'll have the fullest flavor. You'll have a nice thick espresso, as thick as you can get relative to the roast depth, and you'll have more crema. So when is peak flavor? Well, I have tested and taken logs of literally hundreds of roasts. I roast my own beans, and I've taken logs, and I've tested every day from day 1 through to day 30 to day 60 even. And what I found is that it depends on the roast depth. If you have a dark roasted bean, and you can tell this because there's a lot of oil on the outside, for a dark roasted bean, then you can start to use those beans 10 days post-roast. So 10 days after the date that's stamped on the bag. Remember, don't buy the beans if it doesn't have a date that's stamped on the bag to say this is when it's roasted. So 10 days from there, you'll enter into what I call this peak flavor territory, where you get good body, you get good flavor, and you get a lovely crema. If you have Full City, which is your medium dark bean, it's going to have a little bit of oil on the outside, not as much as your dark, then from 14 days post-roast, you're going to get the best espresso, best being in terms of body, flavor, and crema. Medium roast, where you're going to have a tiny little bit of oil on the outside, not too much, 18 days. City, medium light, one of my favorite beans, 21 days. A light roast is going to be best around 28, 30 days after it's actually roasted, is when you want to start, either for filter coffee or for espresso coffee, enjoying those beans. Comes as a shock to a lot of people that a bean should be rested that long if it's light roast. And if you're doing a Nordic-like, or what's called a cinnamon or ultralight roast, then you're looking at around 35 days before it hits that peak flavor window. So that's the biggest mistake, is very often people are using very old beans and they're getting very thin espresso, very weak flavor. If you're going to have the lesser of two evils, have your espresso before peak flavor, but definitely don't leave it till after peak flavor. Oh, I should add, how long is peak flavor? Well, you can typically take these days post-roast for when you start and add on the same number, and you'll be within a safe margin of enjoying the espresso before it starts to go down the wrong side of the bell curve. So in other words, a medium bean, start enjoying that 18 days after it's roasted, for around 18 days before it's going to get over to this part here, and so on. You can apply the same number to weight post-roast as you can for the duration where it's going to be within peak flavor. Nice, easy way to remember it. Mistake number 2 is unintentional taste tainting. And this is a really easy one to fix as well, fortunately. And it has to do with your shower screen and the group head. This is a decent espresso machine, but it's the same on every espresso machine. There's going to be espresso coming out from somewhere, and that somewhere is the basket. This is a naked portafilter, so it doesn't have the double spouts on the bottom, but it's exactly the same. Take this off, have a look at the shower screen underneath. This is called the shower screen, and you'll find that there's either a hex key that unscrews it, perhaps a Phillips screwdriver or a normal screwdriver, or if it doesn't have a screw in the middle, then you grab a teaspoon or something gentle and you just nudge the shower screen off. Don't be afraid of doing this. I was a little bit paranoid because I'm scared that I'm going to open a machine and not be able to shut it up again properly, but they're all built so that you can get under that shower screen. And when you take the shower screen off, you should do this every week, by the way, is what you're looking for. You see this little bit of dirt around here? Okay, so that's pretty normal for after about a week's use. I actually use filter paper on top of the puck to minimize this, but every now and then I forget. And whether you use filter paper or not, it's really, really not important. What is really important is you clean the shower screen every week so you don't end up with a shower screen that looks like this, glued up with rancid coffee. Now that's just going to produce, doesn't matter how good the beans are, how good the roast is, doesn't matter how good your puck prep is, this is going to taste icky in the cup. And that's the second big mistake. So every week, make a little diary note for yourself in your digital calendar or whatever you use, and pull that shower screen off and give it a little clean. You can clean it by steaming it, get a pair of pliers, and you can put it under the steam wand, or you can pop it into some solution of espresso cleaner and just let it soak there overnight. But you must clean that shower screen every night. And sometimes in the group head also, if you see it's gunked up, you might need to also clean that. If all else fails, refer to the manual for cleaning instructions that came with your espresso machine and just follow them religiously because they're generally very, very well thought out. Mistake number 3 is ignorance of what I call the drop. Now, when you have an espresso machine, there's typically a boiler. In the case of a decent, it's heat on demand, but normally there's a boiler. And when you pour your first espresso in the morning in particularly, the pipes are cold and the group head is cold. So if you just take your portafilter out and put your coffee in there and put it back in and press the go button on or the lever or whatever you're using on the lever machine or the E61 handle or whatever, it doesn't matter if it's a heat exchanger or dual boiler, you're still going to need to equalize the temperature. Now with a heat exchanger, you might have to do a cooling flush. With a dual boiler or a decent, you might have to do a heating flush. But either way, you're going to want to flush the group head and you're going to want to make sure that the basket is up to heat. So let me stand back and show you what that looks like. It's a pretty simple routine. You're just going to flush the group head, either by pulling your lever down or whatever it is you're using, a knob. And you're going to empty the water from the basket. Give it just touch the sides. It should feel very, very warm. It won't be so hot that it'll burn you. And then make sure you dry that basket out. Here on the left here, flush pipes or tubes, flush the group head, cool or heat, depending on its heat exchanger, dual boiler. Heat the basket and then dry the basket and you're good to go. Now, the reason why this is really important is because typically, and I've measured this, there's going to be at least a 5-degree drop in the temperature. If your boiler is up to temperature, say it's at 90 degrees or whatever it is, Celsius that you want it to be at. And if you don't do this flush and heat the basket, then you'll drop 5 degrees in temperature as the cold basket and the cold puck, for that matter, sucks the temperature out of the water as it hits. So that first pre-infusion flush is going to be 5 degrees below. Now, 1 or 2 degrees difference in the pour is not going to make a big difference, but 5 degrees, and I've tested this, a blind tasted test, does make a difference to your flavor. You're not going to have a full body flavor. You're not going to have something that's quite as tasty if you're pouring at 5 degrees below the ideal temperature. So it's a heat exchange, then your group head is probably going to be too hot, so you want to cool it down with a flush. If you've got a dual boiler or something like a decent or a lever machine, then you're probably going to have to bring it up to heat. But either way, don't pour your first espresso before you've made sure that the water that's hitting the puck is at optimal temperature. And those are the 3 big mistakes. Fortunately, all very, very easy to fix. So what we've got coming up, we've covered the three most common mistakes, and please, below the video, put comments in, suggestions, ideas. It's a much richer and more valuable community if we have everyone contributing to these. Part 2 is going to be the 6 elements. So this is what I call the 6 elements of great espresso, the 6 ingredients, including the bean, the barrel, the brain, and so on. And we'll unpack that next week. But this is kind of like the strategic view of what has to go into making a great espresso, which is actually quite complicated. But I break this down into 6 steps, and I'll give you that big strategic or helicopter view, as I call it, in part 2. Then we're going to look at foundations, and foundations include things like essential equipment, bean freshness, storage, and puck prep. Part 4, we're going to look at intermediate stuff like water and temperature, the correct temperature to have depending on the sort of espresso you're wanting to enjoy. WDT tools, should you use filter papers, and so on. 5, we're going to be looking at how to do blind taste testing, what sort of logs you want to keep if you get anal like I am, things like high extraction basket, are they worth it, particle analyzers, refractometers, and so on. This is a very deep rabbit hole. So that's in part 5. And part 6 is going to be up to you. Put questions in below each of the videos, and I'll accumulate the most commonly asked questions, the FAQs, the frequently asked questions, and I'll do a video to complete the series based on that. As ever, make sure you subscribe, please. YouTube tell me that only 1 out of 10 viewers subscribe, so please, this is how I get paid, basically, if you subscribe. If you've got value, please subscribe. Make sure you get over to tomsgrinderlab.com as well, and be sure to check out our espresso optimization guide, which covers everything in these series plus some more. Cheers.